Akbar Ahmed has a sterling reputation as a moderate Muslim and thoughtful academic, but there is a sinister undercurrent to his new book, Journey into Europe. He calls for a new Andalusia, which to non-Muslims who have forgotten their own history, conjures up the newly minted historical myth of a paradise of peace and tolerance under the benign rule of Islam. In reality, however, as I show in my own new book, The History of Jihad from Muhammad to ISIS, Jews and Christians in Muslim Spain did not enjoy anything remotely close to equal rights with Muslims and were subjected to the Sharia-mandated discrimination and harassment of dhimmitude, punctuated by occasional outright persecution characterized by enslavement and massacres. Since Islamic law has not changed since then, one wonders what Akbar Ahmed is really recommending to credulous and unsuspecting Europeans. And now he has, in a recent article, called upon Italy to, quote, remember its pluralist past. Once again, it is the responsibility of non-Muslims in the West and no one else to be pluralist and prove their tolerance. Notice that nobody ever calls upon Saudi Arabia to remember its pluralist past when Jews, Christians, and polytheists lived together in Arabia. No one ever calls upon Sharia states to be more tolerant of non-Muslims. The onus is always only on the West. Akbar Ahmed characterizes the foes of mass Muslim migration in Italy as if they were all neo-Nazis, neo-fascists, and anti-Semites, with the strong implication that no one would have any reason for opposing that migration except for racism and xenophobia. He retails in highly misleading fashion some historical incidents but leaves very important other ones out. In the history of jihad, I offer some information about Islam and Muslims in Italy that Akbar Ahmed doesn't mention. The Muslim conquest of Sicily began in 827. By 829, the jihadi invaders had been almost completely driven off the island when they received unexpected help, an invading Muslim army from Al-Andalus, led by a general named Azbag ibn Waqil. Although they ultimately took Palermo, the Muslims were not able to secure the eastern part of Sicily. They were stymied both by the ferocity of the native population and their own inability to unite their various factions. The fighting went on for decades. In 878, the Muslims finally took Syracuse, and the booty was immense. According to the 18th century historian Edward Gibbon, the plate of the cathedral weighed 5,000 pounds of silver. The entire spoil was computed at 1 million pieces of gold, about 400,000 pounds sterling. Along with the treasure, the Muslims enslaved over 17,000 Christians. The exact number is not known, but according to Gibbon, it exceeded the number of the 17,000 Christians who were captured when the Muslims took Taormina and were sent to Africa to lead lives of slavery. The warriors of jihad were finally able to secure complete control of Sicily in the year 902. The conquerors treated their new domains with extreme severity, brutally suppressing the Greek language and forcibly converting thousands of young boys to Islam. Later, the Sicilians were able to drive the invaders out, but the devastation they wrought was immense. Meanwhile, in the year 846, the jihadis attacked Rome, which was of course the grandest city in Christendom aside from Constantinople, but were unable to get through its walls. The basilicas of St. Peter and St. Paul outside the walls, however, as the latter's name indicated, were outside the city's defenses. The jihadis plundered both, taking as much silver and gold as they could, including a sumptuous silver altar from St. Peter's. But finding Rome's walls too strong to breach, they continued down the Appian Way to nearby Fondi, which they plundered, and Gaeta, which they besieged. Although the jihadis had left the immediate vicinity of Rome, the people in the great city were thoroughly alarmed. Despite the Muslims' inability to break through into the heart of the city, the Romans criticized Pope Sergius for not doing enough to keep the city safe. When he died in 847, his successor, Pope Leo IV, swiftly began shoring up Rome's defenses, building new walls and repairing the existing ones, as well as repairing the damage the Muslims had done to St. Peter's and St. Paul's. That all this was necessary was taken for granted by everyone. The jihad forces were still in Italy. The threat was urgent. It had not yet become customary for the Pope of Rome to proclaim that Islam was peaceful and benign, and that the Quran was properly understood, opposed to every form of violence. Nor did the Pope in those days decry the building of walls, as he does now. If anyone had been skeptical about the need for Pope Leo's new walls, they were no longer so in 849, when Muhammad Abul Abbas, the emir of the Aghlabid dynasty that ruled in North Africa, ostensibly under the authority of the Abbasid Caliph, sent a fleet to the mouth of the Tiber River, just 16 miles from Rome. Leo, however, had formed an alliance with several Italian princes, as well as with the Byzantines, and a significant Christian force was there to meet the forces that the Christians called the Saracens. In battle at Ostia, a district of Rome, and aided by a storm that destroyed much of the Muslim fleet, the Christians were victorious, and the conquest and Islamization of Rome was prevented, at least for the foreseeable future. Elsewhere, the Christians were not so fortunate. Gibbon recounted the habitual savagery of the conquerors. He said, "It was the amusement of the Saracens to profane as well as to pillage the monasteries and churches. At the siege of Salerno, a Mussulman chief spread his couch on the communion table, and on that altar sacrificed each night the virginity of a Christian nun. As he wrestled with a reluctant maid, a beam in the roof was accidentally or dexterously thrown down on his head, and the death of the lustful emir was imputed to the wrath of Christ, which was at length awakened to the defense of his faithful spouse." Convivencia, eh? I'm Robert Spencer, Shillman Fellow for the David Horowitz Freedom Center and Director of Jihad Watch. This video has been brought to you by the Center for Security Policy.